as I was saying, that you have this consumption expenditure, investment expenditure, government expenditure. These are the things you can actually control in the short run. And by controlling this, our objective as a policymaker or as a macroeconomist is try to ensure that the output gap is minimum, because if we do that, we are going to have less inflation and unemployment rate. So that's what we have discussed. We have also discussed the various theories which are telling us in what fashion or what is the reason why one can see output gap, and therefore what are the policy prescription one need to do or undertake to minimize the output gap. So we spoke about classical school, we spoke about Keynesian school, we spoke about neoclassical school, we spoke about uh, rational expectation model, we spoke about business cycle theory, and finally we spoke about new Keynesian school. So these are the a few things that we have uh, discussed. Now, thereafter, what we did is we wanted to see that in what way India is positioned in the world economy. And as I have shared some of the data, as you can see from this uh, website, which I have shared with you, that in terms of per capita income, India is quite, India has a long way to go if we were to compare, let's say, India with other developing countries. So, for instance, the per capita income for India is 2104. You can check what is the latest per capita income. But if you were to compare this with the US per capita income, the number is abysmally small, because the US, if I'm not mistaken, is in the neighborhood of 61,000 US dollar per capita per annum. So I said that you can actually uh, get the data from these two sources. All you have to do is click on this, and as I said that I'm planning to put all the slides so that you can check before the exam what we are talking about. Okay. Now, a quick because we have already done macroeconomics, so I'm not going to spend much time. But so long we have talked about the demand side, and this is actually about the supply side. So supply side is, as you can see, is a function of labor and capital. So I'm going to rush through some of these models, and again, these are the people who have got some of them. As you know, Robert Solow is well-known economist. So basically, it all started off with Harrod-Domer model, where basically he's saying, or they are saying, that the supply of output, which is my Y, it's a function of labor and capital. But one of the things what he was suggesting, or what they were suggesting, is labor and capital are used in fixed proportion, meaning that for 2 units of labor, I also need 2 units of capital. Now, what they were proposing is if I increase both labor and capital, then what happens is you will find the economy to be growing. Now, one of the fallacy of the Harrod-Domer model is that seldom you will find that labor and capital are used in fixed proportion, because they are not actually being used in fixed proportion, and therefore that was one of the limitation. And also their main assumption was if I increase my capital by 1 unit and labor by 1 unit, then if my capital goes increased by 1 unit and labor by 1 unit, then what happens is the output is also going to increase by 1 unit. But that is not the case, because as you can see, in the context of Indian economy or in the context of Russian economy, you will find that the government has invested quite a bit on the government manufacturing units. For instance, SAIL, Steel Authority of India Limited, NMDC, or for that matter, so there are plenty of government manufacturing units, what we call as government, which are under the government sector. And what you will notice that, because if the assumption is if K is increasing, my output is also going to increase with labor. That is not going to be the case with India and Russia, because the amount of investment which is undertaken by the government, the capital is not efficient, meaning that you have read all this news of how inefficient are the government undertaking unit. Yeah, Shivam, question.
So in all these growth models, were only labor and capital used, or other factors also were mentioned
Yeah,
by these?
so that's exactly what I'm trying to explain. Initially, when Harold Dumas came, they just took labor and capital in the fixed proportion. Fixed proportion means if there are 2 units of machine, maybe there is 1 unit of labor. And if 1 unit of labor is working with 2 units of machine, it means if I were to employ 2 units of labor, you need 4 units of machine. If I have 3 units of labor, I need 6 units of machine. So that what is known as fixed proportion. So the problem with the Harold Dumas model was, seldom you will find that labor and capital are being used in fixed proportion. That is number one. Number two is they haven't talked about technology, in the explicit way. So for the first time, Solo came, and as you can see that whether we are talking about any, while we are discussing about the growth theories, meaning that as to how to control the output gap, each sets of economists came out with their own idea, and the economist who actually was trying later trying to explain the phenomenon output gap was actually trying to address some of the limitation of the previous sets of economists. So the same thing is happening in the case of this growth models, because initially when Harold Dumas came out with this idea of, because if you see, there is not too much difference between what Harold Dumas said and what Keynes said, because Keynes also said that all you have to do is government expenditure. Now, government expenditure for what? Government expenditure to maybe for some infrastructure, building some infrastructure, or building some factories. So building infrastructure, factories, these are part of all this K component. And you are actually doing that by involving the labor. So what is the difference between Harold Dumas and Keynes? In the sense that this is more like a long-term thing. Keynes was more like a short-term. So Harold Dumas was saying that if you invest in factories, because you cannot invest in factories just within a span of 2 months or 3 months. In order to build the factory shed, it itself may take more than one year in some cases. So that was the basic difference between Harold Dumas and Keynes. Harold Dumas was more like a long run model, but the problem with Harold Dumas was they were putting emphasis on something, both factor inputs in labor and capital. So Solo came and said that in addition to labor and capital, so this will answer your question, there is another factor, which is technology, right? Because a farmer, just to give an example, a farmer in India may be working with assets of cow or bullock to maybe irrigate his or plow his field. But in US, if you go and look what the farmers are doing, they have heavy machineries, which they use to plow their field. So therefore, because in India we are plowing our field with a pair of bullock or cows, the productivity of the Indian farmers are much, much less than what you see in the US. And therefore, this role of technology comes, and why technology is becoming important. And this is what Solo was trying to argue. Now, then came Romer, But in Solo model, just to quickly say, one of the problem was he was saying that if I'm keeping one factor constant, let's say if I'm keeping capital constant, so what is the difference between Solo and Harrod-Domar? Harrod-Domar was saying this is happening in terms of fixed proportion, the employment of labor and capital. But Solo said there is no such fixed proportion. You can have one of the between labor and capital, one of the input as constant, whereas you can actually increase the other input. But what he's saying that if you are keeping one input constant and if you are increasing labor, then what happens is the marginal productivity of labor is going to fall over a period of time. So that's what he's saying. So it's like this. Let's say that in the classroom, I have given an assignment, and initially let's say there are 30 of you in that classroom, and initially I've given you 15 laptops, So which means for every 2 students, I'm giving 1 laptop, and therefore, because you're sharing the laptop, your productivity is going down. So that is exactly what Solo was trying to argue. But the moment I increase the capital, then the productivity of the other factor also goes up. So this is called diminishing return to factor inputs. Okay. So the problem with diminishing return to factor inputs is, without going much into the detail, is the growth of any economy that will asymptotically converge to the long-term growth rate of the population. And a population in what way? It's net of depreciation rate of capital. So basically, if I were to go by the Solo model, everything was fine except for the fact that this factors, diminishing return to factor inputs, means because capital is constant in the long run, because as I said, if I'm looking into the aggregate demand and supply, in the short run, you will find that if you remember, your short run supply curve is vertical, in the sense that something I was saying in the context of when we opened our discussion, that in the short run I cannot change the supply of skilled labor, I cannot change the supply of, let's say, number of factories or maybe technology. So these are given in the short run, and therefore the supply curve, which I am denoting as AS, that is upward sloping. So therefore, if this is the case, that means what can change in the short run? What can change in the short run is the employment, which is a function of labor, right? So if labor is changing in the short run, then what, according to Solo, because my capital and technology is given, the labor is going to witness a diminishing return to scale. So what first unit of labor may contribute in terms of producing output, let's say the first unit of labor is contributing 4 units of output, second unit of labor will be contributing 6 units of output, meaning that the second unit is basically, if I'm talking about marginal term, how much the second unit of labor is contributing, it is 6 plus 4, which is 2. The third unit will be contributing maybe 1 marginal additional unit of output. So if I go by the Solo model, it is saying that because capital and technology and land and other resources are constant in the short run, beyond a point, my economy or any economy cannot grow. It is going to grow at the steady state, which is defined by the supply side. Now, the problem with the Solo model was, as I was saying, that diminishing return to scale. And if I were to consider the Solo model, that means that in the short run, no economy can grow. And yet, if you look into any standard data source, you will find all the economies are also growing in the short run, be it growing up or maybe in some cases, in seldom you'll find that they are growing negative, but most of the cases they are growing, because COVID scenario is kind of black swan event. So that's why we found that in some cases we are having or witnessing a negative quarterly growth numbers, but that kind of thing does not happen that often, and therefore this is one of the bigger criticism of the solo model, which is saying that in the short run, given the supply of output, the economy is the economies around the world cannot grow at a different rate. So all the economy, given the supply of labor, capital, and other input, they are going to grow at the steady state. So that is one of the problem with the solo model. Then came Romer. So in case of Romer, he said one thing, it is called learning by doing. So let me go back to this example. In this example, I was saying that in your class, if there are 30 students and if I'm giving 15 laptops, then what happened is for each student, the marginal productivity is going down because I am asking 30 students to share 15 laptops. Romer said, even under that condition, the marginal productivity of labor is not going to fall. Because, why? Because this knowledge, this technology, there is some externality. For instance, if I am using the laptop, I am passing on some information to my friend so that when the time comes for him to use the laptop, then you are much more equipped. You are going to less time. You are going to do it fast. You are going to be much more productive. So the problem of the solo model was the economy cannot grow beyond the steady state of growth, which Romer model was able to take care of this particular problem by suggesting that there is no diminishing return to factor inputs because there is something called learning by doing, and therefore you have constant return to factor inputs. Okay, so this is what the Romer was saying, and if I include this assumption, constant return to factor inputs, it implies even in the short run or for some time, the economy can grow because there is something called learning by doing, where basically we try to share the knowledge, try to share the technology. So for instance, even if I assume that in the short run, India cannot produce any, let's say, fighter jet, but what can happen in the short run is we can actually start importing, which is actually happening, Rafale from France, and therefore I can actually start importing the technology. So it's kind of saying that even though in the short run, as Solo suggested, the supply side is constant, according to Romer, he is suggesting no. If we are actually allowing people to mingle, if we are allowing industry to talk to one another, if we are allowing the free flow of technology, then it is possible, even though the domestic economy does not have, let's say, that much availability of capital, So even then, you are going to see a condition where what Romer is suggesting, because you are getting access to newer technology, because you are learning from others, it is possible for the Indian economy, or for that matter, any economy, to grow, right? And finally is the Hall-Jones model. Coming back to your question, Hall-Jones model is basically saying that there are other factors, because all this previous three model were only taking labor and capital. Hall-Jones is saying there are other factors, for instance, institution, So if I'm talking about institution in India, what are the name of few successful institution? For instance, SEBI. It's a very efficient, which is in the business of overseeing that the stock market is working properly and no one is actually doing any hereafter. So in that way, SEBI is a successful institution. The other is Supreme Court. If you compare a Supreme Court with High Court with, let's say, the District Magistrate Court, you will find, compared to the District Magistrate Court or Lower Court or High Court, Supreme Court is quite efficient. So again, institution can actually help any particular economy to grow. Why? Because as you know that World Bank indicators, they have a document. It's called Doing Business. I'm sure that you have heard about this, Doing Business Report, and you can check the World Bank website. So what they are actually doing in this Doing Business Report, they are actually ranking countries on the basis of various parameters, and one of the parameter is how efficient are the institutions. If I were to open a factory, how much cost does it take for me in terms of money and time before I can actually start a business? So that is basically saying that for the developed countries, the cost of doing business is much less. The institutions function more properly, and therefore they are able to grow much faster rate. So that is something which is, if you want to open a factory, you have to get clearance from the Ministry of Environment. You have to get a clearance from the state government in terms of procuring your land. You have to get clearance from the fire department so as to ensure that there is less probability of your factory catching fire, so on and so forth. So if, let's say, I'm talking about within India, you will find if you are trying to do business in Telangana, it is providing you the most, I would say, because in Telangana, if you want to do business, everything can be obtained, because as I said, that you have to obtain a fire clearing license, you have to obtain a license for let's say obtaining land, you have to also get access to banks, and as you can see that each one of these are different entity. But if the government wish, as is happening in the case of Telangana, that is also called single window clearance, meaning that if I want to open a factory, all the documents which may be coming from different ministry or department, I can make avail of that in a single window. I just go and submit all the required documents rather than me running from one department to another. So in that way, institutions are quite important before we can take a call that, of course, there is labor, capital, and technology are also important. But Hall and Jones said that in addition to labor, capital, and technology, institutions are equally important. Just think about this. If you are stuck in some high court, it will take you at least 6 to 7 years before the case get resolved. So therefore, we say that high court or lower court, they are one of the least efficient institution. On the other hand, SEBI, TRAI is the Telecom Regulatory Authority of India, or for that matter, Election Commission. These are some of the success story when it comes to having an efficient institution. So Hall and Jones say that in addition to labor, capital, and technology, you should also include this institution as a factor, this infrastructure as a factor, which actually define the difference in output growth across various countries. Okay. Any question?
Yeah. So, like, even though the infrastructure is there, for example, SEBI, you said it's a very efficient infrastructure and everything.
Yeah.
In India, still, like as you said in the previous class, less than 3% of the population.
Yes.
So that's what I'm saying. So people.
No, but if you see why people are not trading that much in the Indian market, the reason is not SEBI being efficient or not so being efficient. It is because people don't have access to banks. So the first thing for you to do trading is you have to open a demat account. And for
Yes.
you to open a demat account, I have to ensure that people are financially, they know how to operate the demat account. I have access to banks. Now, what before, let's say, this Prime Minister Jandhan account, in terms of people having access to bank, it was, if you go and talk to anyone in the rural area, most of them, they don't have banks. Even if they have bank account right now, thanks to Jandhan movement, you will find most of them are not operating. It's just lying idle. Why? Because most of these people are financially not literate. Even
Yes.
a few years back, I was not knowing how to trade in the stock market. So it's not only that people don't want to trade. It's also, but once I start trading in the stock market, and why I'm telling SEBI is efficient. Have we seen something like Harshad Mehta like scam? The answer is no. I'm sure that you have heard about this Harshad Mehta scam, which happened sometime in early part of 90s.
Yes, sir.
So now the reason why I'm saying SEBI is efficient, because it is actually preventing such scam to happen. It's not that people are not trading, but for the people who are trading in this particular market, in the stock market, why I'm saying SEBI is efficient, it is actually taking all the necessary measures so as to prevent any other scam from happening. So that's so in that way I'm saying that SEBI is efficient.
Yes. So if we consider this, then also the people's literacy also
Yes.
factor.
So in that way, in the institution, you should then talk about not SEBI, you should talk about education, right? So again, if I'm talking about education, you will find all these universities which are dealing with higher education, they are much more efficient, because
Yes.
if you go to any government university, most of the time you will not get admission because there are very few of them. And yet these universities like IIT, Delhi University, or Bombay University, they are producing graduates who are one of the best in the world. However, if I'm talking about primary education as again an institution, primary education, and we are going to talk about the education, so just hang on. So in terms of primary education, we are not doing that great. So again, it boils down to the fact that there are few places or institutions which are doing really good, and there are others which are not doing that well, and therefore we should try to bring reforms. So one of the recent thing, and again we are going to talk in detail. That if you read newspaper, if you are watching TV channels, you will find what is the big news these days, apart from Sushant Singh Rajput. What is the other big news? Anyone?
The farmers' bill.
Yes, the the APMC Act. We are going to talk in detail about the APMC Act.
Sir, also the labor
Yes,
law.
that happened yesterday. So we are going to talk about the Labor APMC Act. So these are all part of reforms, and if this happens, we are hoping to get a better institution, and if that happens, our output is going to grow. So that is the thing. So anyway, any other question before I move forward? Okay. Now, if we want to think that what are the two factors which actually help any country to grow. So the first factor is the technology, and how I'm defining technology now. This is important. We are defining when we are defining technology, basically we are dealing with, when we are dealing with the long-term growth, we are dealing with two things. Now, if you think about this, this first component, this is happening because of technology. Why? Now think of that. Think of that example which I just now gave. The farmers in US and the farmers in India. Now, in US, they are working with machine. In India, they are working with a pair of bullocks. So, where do you think that in order to produce the same unit of output, where do you think that I will have to give more energy and time? It is certainly going to be the case in case of India, because in India we don't have technology to manufacture these sophisticated machines like crop harvester, or tractors. Of course, in some cases, in case of the big farmers, they have access to all these machines. But in general, and this is again we are going to discuss in detail. In India, just to give you a reference, there are 500 million people who are dependent on agriculture and allied activities, to earn their livelihood. Now, out of that 500 millions, almost 80% of the people who are associated with the agricultural sector, these are the people who are small and marginal farmers with less than 1.15 hectares of land holding. So what it means for these poor people, you don't have access to all this crop harvesters or tractors or any machine, so they have to depend on this pair of animal to do their job. So therefore, technology is very important, because what is GDP over population? This is my per capita income. Now here we have seen that in case of India, it is around 2,100 US dollar. Now again, if you see the size of the Indian economy, I think now we have actually crossed Japan. You have to check it yourself. I think in terms of the market size, we are the fourth, right?
No, sir. Yeah.
We are the fourth.
No, sir. Fifth.
Okay.
Sir, fifth.
Yeah. So check the website. So the first is US, of course, with a $21 trillion market size. Then comes China. Then comes Japan is there, and which are the other two countries? Which is in between?
Germany and India.
Germany and India.
Germany.
Yeah. So basically, if you're talking to a friend of yours who is in foreign country and say, hey, my country is the fifth largest big economy in the world, so it is a sense of pride for us. But the moment we divide that market side, which I'm calling as GDP, over population, we are one of the least developed country, or in the low developing country, So the idea is to how to ensure that we start growing. As I said, that for US, it is 61,000. If not 61,000, how much time will it take for us to go from 2,100 to, let's say, even 10,000? I'm talking about absolute term. There are two ways I can grow. One is through technology, because if I somehow get access to technology, I have to actually give less number of hours of work, and I can actually therefore start getting more and more number of output, So that's how you will see most of the growth which happened in North American economy and also in Western European countries. That thing happened thanks to technology. So if you remember the Great Industrial Revolution, so when the Industrial Revolution happened during the 18th centuries, then what happened was, all of a sudden, Great Britain and most part of the Europe, because they got access to this steam technology, they started growing at a much faster rate, And I'm going to share one video with you, which actually will clear this thing. So, because if I look into between 13th until 18th, middle of 17th century, the two big economy in the world were India and China, and then something happened, starting with Industrial Revolution, that they got access to technology, they got access to better machines, so that they can win the war, and that's how they started colonizing other countries, and that's how Europe actually marched ahead. And of course, after Second World War, we saw that the US economy also marching ahead, because if you see the history or look at the history of the US economy, these are the people who actually migrated or immigrated from Europe to US. So most of the, if you go to study in the US, you will find that many people you will come across whose forefather came from either Great Britain or Germany or France or Italy, and got settled in. I'm sure that you have watched this movie Godfather, where you will find a considerable number, chunk of people in the US who actually migrated from Italy. So likewise, so this the technology aided growth story happened in the context of uh, Europe and Latin America, North American economy. Then there is this another way to increase growth, which is hours worked by population. This is called by increase in labor force participation. And this is the kind of growth which happened in the context of the Southeast Asian economy. So most part of the Southeast Asian economy, if you visit, for instance, I think the other day someone was asking the question that was India like this from very beginning, or can I think of any example where some country started growing all of a sudden faster compared to others, and therefore the difference in growth rate between the countries which did well with the countries which are not doing that well, it has over a period of time widened. So the answer to that question, I was referring to Japan and South Korea. These are the classic tests. Even China, if I look into the data, and you can do it yourself, and because I have said that you can get all this data from World Development Indicators, you will find that early 40s, late or early 50s, per capita wise, India, China, Japan, South Korea. Japan was actually better, but then it got devastated thanks to Second World War. But in particular, China and South Korea. In fact, North Korea was better than South Korea. If I look into the early part of 50s, now look what has happened. It's the other way around. North Korea has gone into dock, whereas South Korea has marched ahead. So even Singapore, if you see, the way it has grown. Now, what was the reason that the Southeast Asian economy, South Korea, started growing so fast? It was not so much about the technology, but about labor force participation. How? Because they gave emphasis on vocational education. What is vocational education? Vocational education is,
Skill based.
yeah, skill based. Very good. So do I produce enough of electricians? Do I produce enough of plumbers? Do I produce enough of people who are in the business of managing? Managers. That is also a part of skills. So most of the most of the Southeast Asian countries, they started investing on education, in particular vocational education. And because I'm actually, as I said, that it is not easy to produce skilled laborers. So because they started producing skilled labor, if you can see that why as a function of labor and capital, this portion went up for the Southeast Asian economies, and for the West European economy and for US, this thing went up. So Southeast Asian economy, they were able to increase their per capita income, focusing on this portion. Whereas the other portion. So the moral of the story is, be it if you were to increase your long-term growth, both of them are necessary. Technology is important, so are how to ensure that you're producing enough of skilled labor. So both of them are equally important when it comes to the long-term growth. Any question? So this is what we discussed so far. Is labor productivity is nothing but the quantity of goods and services that can be produced by one worker or by 1 hour of work. Because many times in the context of India, you have heard there is a concept of disguised unemployment, because we have too many people who are dependent upon the agricultural sector. And if you go and check the rural area, you will find that in most of the cases, these people are actually not doing any work. So this is the this is what we are going to see. Okay. Now and with this we are going to end the major chunk of the discussion on the theory part, and from here we are going to go into the applied part. So this equation is quite important. Why? Because I can rewrite this equation as y minus c plus equal to I plus g plus x minus m. What I've done is I've taken this c from here to here. Okay. Now you do a little bit of manipulation, in the sense that you add this negative t both sides. What is this t? T is my tax rate. So what I get over here is, this is my saving, because y less consumption less tax is my saving. Then what I have is investment. Then what I have is, this is government expenditure. So government expenditure less government income is what we call as the fiscal deficit. So you can think, if government expenditure is greater than T, which is the government income, so I can rewrite this as GFD, which is basically saying gross fiscal deficit. This stands for gross fiscal deficit. And I can rewrite this equation again as, if I take negative common, I have m minus x, which I'm calling as current account deficit. Okay. Now, why government borrowing money in excess of what it has, in terms of producing goods and services, is bad? Because if you think, at any given point of time, whatever I save, I can invest. So S is equal to I in the domestic scenario or in the autarkic condition. So whenever there is an increase in government fiscal deficit, this has to come in the way of current account deficit, right? So an increase in government fiscal deficit always lead to an increase in current account deficit, and that is bad, because if I have more and more current account deficit, why it is bad? Because this comes with the cost. Why? Because our exchange rate will start depreciating, our purchasing power in the world is going to fall, so on and so forth. Inflation rate will be higher, and all these are bad things. So one has to ensure that government fiscal deficit, so this formula is very important, because this is what we derived right now, because if saving is equal to investment, if there is an increase in government fiscal deficit, it has to come at the cost of current account deficit, which is bad thing, because this lead to inflation, this lead to exchange rate depreciation and things like that. Okay. So I will stop here before we meet for the next class, and